Hello, everybody. Hello. Hi. Thanks for coming out tonight to Flyleaf Books. We're your local independent bookstore, and we really appreciate you coming and buying books and attending this event. It lets us have these, so appreciate it. Tonight we have the pleasure of hearing from David Guterson presenting Evelyn in Transit with Daniel Wallace. David Guterson is the author of 13 books, including the PEN/Faulkner Award winner Snow Falling on Cedars, which was made into a major motion picture, translated into 25 languages, and has sold more than 4 million copies worldwide. He lives on Bainbridge Island, Washington. Daniel Wallace is the author of 6 novels, including Big Fish, his first, which has since been adapted and released as a movie and a Broadway musical. He is the J. Ross McDonald's Distinguished Professor of English at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. All right, thank you. We've got those books up front if you want one after the talk. And I'm sure we could get them signed for you. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Yes.
So, thank you. This is a huge treat and surprise for me because we met half an hour ago in a parking lot up in near the intersection of Franklin Street and MLK. He was just sitting there, and I picked him up, and he said, "Hey, you want to be a conversation partner?" No, we've been in touch, just email, and this transpired, and it's just one of those wonderful happenstance events that make life fun, you know, one of those things that make life fun. So we're going to be talking about this book, which I loved and I love to read for so many different reasons. But before we get to this, I was wondering if you would talk to us about the path to this book, and not just specifically the path to it alone, but you've written 13 books, and you've always been interested in Buddhism, and yet this is the first time you've written about it directly. So just talk a little bit about the arc of that, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind at all. But before I get to that, I want to express my gratitude to the bookstore to have the opportunity to share my work. And I want to express gratitude to you. I know that this is effort and it's a job. You've got to read the book and think about it, and I really appreciate it. And gratitude to all of you for coming out. You know, writers spend a lot of time sitting alone doing their work, and it's always nice to see that. In fact, there are people who are interested in what you do. It's a moving thing and a meaningful thing for me to be on a book tour and meet readers. So beginning with that. It has been actually a very long journey to this book that started for me in childhood. So I grew up in North Seattle. I grew up about 1.5 miles north of the University of Washington. And in the late 50s and early 60s, this was the period of the Tibetan diaspora. So the Chinese Communist Revolution happened in the late 40s. Immediately in the aftermath of that, the Chinese decided that the motherland needed to get larger, and it began to incorporate various other territories into it, and that included Tibet. So Tibet lost its autonomy. The Chinese military came in because there was resistance to this, and thousands of Tibetans fled across the mountains into India and Nepal, which was a tragedy, but at the same time an opportunity for Western scholars, Tibetologists, people in Buddhist studies. And the University of Washington happened to have a premier Tibetan Studies department at the time. And so they sent a professor over with some funding to find a couple of lamas that they could bring to Seattle who could help them with the penetrating these indecipherable and esoteric texts that they could translate, but not really make sense of. And so they allocated a couple of lamas and hired them and moved them to Seattle. And they had family. And so this family settled 1.5 miles north University of Washington, in other words, in my neighborhood. And it turned out that they had 5 sons, one of whom was exactly my age. And we became fast friends. And because of that, I was in their home a lot, eating meals, staying overnight, just what happens when you're in the home of a friend and you're young. And I was in, like any child, you have a lot of friends and you're in a lot of homes. But of course, this one was very different from the other homes I was in, not just because it was the home of Tibetans, but because I met with a kind of kindness and generosity of spirit there that was very unusual in my life to come across. And by the time I was maybe 17, I started hanging out with this guy when I was about 12. By the time I was about 17 and, I was maturing intellectually and so on, I began to ask myself, why is this home like this? What is behind this? What is the sort of under the foundational, way of thinking that might lead to people being so generous and kind, which then engendered in me an interest in Tibetan Buddhism. And then I made a formal study of it in college. I studied Tibetan language, both written and oral, briefly. I studied Buddhism in sort of a formal way, and that study has continued lifelong. But then the other part of the question, so why did it take me so long to get around to this? Since this happened to me, as a very young person, and now finally 13 books later, I'm writing this. Well, I always wanted to touch on this material as a fiction writer. But I also always felt apprehension about it, trepidation about it, because I sensed that in the world there was a sort of, in the Western world, among potential readers of my work, potentially a sort of knee-jerk reaction and even sort of a retraction from the idea of Buddhism, that a lot of people associate it with New Age, woo-woo, that it's something that's been romanticized and that people in Hollywood, have digested. And I was just apprehensive to sort of connect with Buddhist material and then engender that response. I couldn't really find a way into the material that I felt would sort of free me from that until I hit on this. And I'm actually not the first person to hit on this sort of primary plot device. There was a film that came out, I think in the 70s or 80s, a Bernardo Bertolucci film called The Little Buddha. And it uses essentially the same plot device as this book. So in this book, you have a single mother under the age of 30 with one child, very young, a boy, and living in the heartland in Indiana. And one day there's a knock at the door. She opens it, and standing there is a delegation of Tibetan lamas in robes, who inform her that her son is, in their mind, the reincarnation of a very prominent Tibetan lama named Norbu Rinpoche, who is in a lineage of reincarnated lamas, and that her son, Cliff, is the 7th. And they would like Cliff to come with them, go to Nepal, take monastic vows, enter into monastic life, and embrace his role as the 7th Norbu Rinpoche, which then puts Evelyn in the position of grappling with this matter and deciding what to do about it. And I just felt that this sort of practical, concrete plot device would allow me into the material without eliciting that knee-jerk retraction that a lot of people have, sort of eye-rolling thing about Buddhism that can happen.
Yeah. I think you also handle that, though. This happens, but it's not the first thing that happens in the book. You're not greeted with a kid with a bunch of llamas come to the door and say, "Come with us." We meet Evelyn, and she is nothing like. I mean, she's a free spirit. She is herself so completely that we follow her into this world, but in that initial stages of it, she's pretty far away from it.
Yes. Well, let me say first that you're absolutely right that the this sort of plot mechanism that I described of the knock at the door does not come at the beginning of the book. I think in a more sort of conventionally written book, it would indeed. We're sort of used to that formula. A question or a conflict is introduced very early, and you're induced to turn the pages because you want to find out what she's going to do. That's the conventional sort of Aristotelian plot with conflict and rising action and crisis and denouement. I have no objection to that sort of thing, and I've done it myself. But the further along I get in my life as an author, the more I am less interested myself in that formula, in reading that formula. And out of respect to my readers, I want to offer something other than that maybe is something richer and deeper, some other reasons to turn the page, some other kinds of interest that might be induced by what you're coming across. And so I decided to leave this sort of linchpin plot moment for later and do other things first. And one of the primary things I do is illuminate this character from childhood, who is quite a misfit. She, nothing on offer to her in the culture around her makes a lot of sense to her as a possibility for her own life. She's living in the heartland. She's going to Catholic schools as a child. Well, she begins to see that her future would, if she sort of follows course, is going to be something, very conventional, and that the kind of values on offer to her would include, material well-being and maybe the purchase of pleasurable experiences. Those are the sort of things that we are taught to value in our culture, and it makes no sense to her because those things don't address the primary question that it's at the heart of her being from childhood, which is, what is a meaningful life? I mean, what really indeed makes for a good life? And these things that are on offer to her by our culture, in her mind, are simply not going to get her there. Now, that's how she's built. That's just sort of how she came into the world. And I'd like to just read briefly to give you a sense of who she is and how she thinks as a child. And so we're meeting her here at about the age of 9 or 10, and she's in school, in this Catholic school. And she gets an assignment, which is a fairly common one that children get, which is answer this question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And so what do you want to be when you grow up was her title, because that's what the teacher wrote on the blackboard. The instructions were have an introduction and a conclusion, have separate paragraphs with 3 to 5 sentences in each, spell everything right, explain. So here's Evelyn's answer. A nun who lives in a convent in the sticks. The wall is a circle. Nobody is let in. Sheep are there. We milk them. We take wool off. We make cheese. We make sweaters. A truck comes to a hole in the wall. The back part comes through. We don't see a driver. We open the truck back. We take out the food. We put in the cheese and the sweaters. The truck drives away. We close up the hole. We eat the food. We get to wear boots. We get to wear special hats, secret hats. My job is catching lambs and giving them a bottle. I sit on straw because of mud. We sleep outside. We have a cave for Mass. The light is candles. The convent is far away. There is a forest. The convent is in the middle. We are the best nuns. No one talks, only when we pray. In conclusion, I want to be a nun when I grow up because of what I wrote. So, this is a child whose worldview is when she's asked what she wants to be when she grows up, the only thing she can think of that makes any sense is to live a spiritual life. It's just how she's put together.
Referring back to the initial point you were making about the kind of books that you're engaged with now, and you wanted to write that book, And I think it's a truism that authors want to fill in that space on the shelf, with the book that hasn't been there by them. So that's what you did in this book. You sort of mirrored who you are through the structure of the book, and the structure of the book is really quite interesting. And also Evelyn's voice, and really the narrative voice in here captures this character and this woman in a way that is very specific and knowing by a male author. When you read it, you'll see it. The language is so. I mean, it's not. I mean, calling it simple seems like calling it superficial, but it's not at all. It's just very direct. Reflects who the characters are, and when you don't have that boiling conflict, it's the language that has to compel you to read it.
You're right. Yeah, I mean, what for me as a reader, one thing that keeps me turning pages is the beauty of the prose itself. That is reason enough for me to continue, even when I don't have this sense of a sort of a conflict and a question and an issue and what's going to happen next. Beautiful prose in and of itself will drive me forward, and I did have that in mind. You brought up this matter of a male writer writing a primary character who's female, which is a challenge. But by definition, what fiction writers do is take the risk of getting outside themselves. Otherwise, you're writing memoir, or you've sort of precluded the very sort of foundation of fiction from your work, which is to enter into the hearts and minds of other people who are not yourself in various ways, whether it be gender or sexuality or race or ethnicity or religion, whether it be somebody who lives in another place and time. By definition, that's what you're doing, which doesn't make it any less difficult, but that's what you do. And one of the ways that I go about that is by attempting, anyway, to deconstruct my own persona. So I realize, in retrospect, I suppose, that my persona, my being as it presents itself to the world, is a cultural construct that I digested, that I learned. So I became an American male. And in some ways, I would say an American male of the American West, because I see these sort of differences in ethos and worldview that are regional. And so I'm able to, at least I attempt to see myself as this culturally constructed persona. And then I tell myself, okay, that's culturally constructed. That doesn't mean that that's who I am. Maybe I can deconstruct that enough to sort of find my way down inside to who I am divorced from that. And that puts me in a sort of, I hope, sort of neutral place from which I can then build up a sense of the heart and mind of someone else by eliminating myself to the degree that that's possible.
Yeah.
So that's sort of my approach to it. I think method actors might be doing a bit of the same,
Yeah.
I feel that it's a similar thing going on for me to method acting.
And I think that you're absolutely right, is the nature of being a writer is inhabiting these different people, the way they think, the way they are. If we just stuck to ourselves, God, that would be so dreary. So this idea of cultural appropriation, to me, this objection that people have had of writing from perspectives that aren't your own, has always felt fallacious to me. And really, it's only about whether you do it well or not.
I agree with that entirely. It's a matter of respect. So you definitely are entering in, when you write about people who are not yourself, you definitely are entering into a risk. And your obligation to other human beings is to do it fully and to not cut corners. and to see it as a serious, obligation to other human beings, to respect their dignity. And I think as long as you're bringing yourself to it fully that way, that if somebody then has a criticism, you can feel at peace that you brought yourself to it fully. The act itself does not seem to me wrong, but engaging in it without really fully investing yourself in that way does seem to me problematic. Yeah.
But yeah, so it's, your research, as it were, was self or research. That is, I'm going to research being a woman. Now, that's not what happens, but so you were able to, if you eliminated David from the story, you felt like through your own experience in the world, you're able to gather that and recreate this persona of Evelyn.
Yeah. So, look, at one level, you accept that there are some things that are common to all of us. So we can sort of readily expect that everybody on planet Earth in some way is concerned about, say, mortality, that's a common human concern, that I don't have to worry about that one when I enter into Evelyn. I guess that I'm pretty confident mortality is something that she thinks about too. There are those kinds of things sometimes called universal or existential or human condition type elements that you can safely assume are present. But the other part of the equation is that, on the other hand, everybody is very, very different. And so you're balancing those two things. You want somebody to be fully human the way that you are, but you also want to honor the fact that everybody else is ultimately a mystery. And so there's a sort of a balancing act between those two things going on. In the case of Evelyn, I really did bring a lot of myself. So Evelyn, at the very beginning of the book, page 1, she has this sudden and abrupt and dramatic jolting experience of awakening out of the childhood dream into the realization that she's a separate and distinct human being with an identity, which happens to most people kind of gradually. You gradually awaken out of the childhood dream, and piece by piece you begin to understand that you're somebody with a name, and that you too are subject to the human condition. Increasingly you recognize that and feel distress over it, in Evelyn's case and in my case, it happened very dramatically and suddenly in the form of a jolt at a very young age. So I share that with her, and I know the kind of door that opens in a human being, which from the perspective of other people makes you look like a troubled child because there's a distress that comes with it. From your own perspective, you're not troubled. From your own perspective, you have your eye on the prize and everything is clear to you. You know what matters. You are searching for meaning and everybody else is distracted. That's how it feels from the inside. But from the outside, you look troubled and off, and you need counseling, and you're that sort of child.
Yeah.
And so I had those elements in myself to sort of bring to Evelyn.
Were you a weird kid?
So
I know everybody wants to know.
well, I had that. I had that kind of existential distress very early on. So in that regard, I'm sure that I was weird. And here's another thing that may strike you as odd, but Evelyn does not like the way she looks at all. I mean, from a very early age, one day she takes a pair of scissors and she cuts her bangs, and then all day she worries that maybe she's really made herself look bad. And then she looks in the mirror and she has this awful sinking realization that it really doesn't matter how she cuts her bangs. She just doesn't look good. And she's huge. And so as much as she has chosen sort of to be a misfit and doesn't fit in, she's also condemned by others not to fit in. The thing that sort of defines us socially is not in her favor. Now, you probably can't tell by looking at me, but you can see this thing on my chin, this red thing. It's, what do you call it? A birthmark, a huge red birthmark, which in childhood was even more Okay, you might be able to see it.
Okay.
Anyway, I was always acutely embarrassed about it. When I looked in the mirror as a child and I saw that thing, I thought, uh-oh, like I'm some kind of weird monster.
Right.
And so even though as time went by, that became very tangential to my sense of myself, as a child, I knew what that felt like, to not like the way you look. So I could bring that
Right.
to Evelyn. You know, I could take that sort of sense of, I have this huge ugly thing on my face that everybody can see,
Right.
and the sort of dispiriting and falling feeling that comes with something like that, and I could work that into the character. My point is, you can take elements of your own being and put them in play. Yeah.
And at what age do we just realize that nobody cares about you? They're only thinking of their own bang.
Yeah, there's always that.
That's the important thing.
It's true. But Evelyn really stands out because she is enormous. Like, and I'm not saying fat, strong and huge and stout. And, you know, in this room, she would be the person whose head is way up here while the rest of us are all, but she really does stand out as sort of a freak and thinks of herself as a freak. And sometimes tells herself, I look like Bigfoot. So she is in a sort of an exceptional position with regard to her sense of her appearance, which makes it a deeper question to grapple with than it is for most of us. Yeah.
Does your affiliation with Buddhism influence your writing, not just in this book, but is your approach to story itself?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would describe myself not as a Buddhist, but as maybe like Buddhist adjacent.
Right.
In the sense that when I came across it as a relatively young person and began to study it, I recognized that Buddhism was asking the same questions that I was asking.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for example, in the monotheistic Western world, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, these questions about the existence of God and afterlife and soul, your soul, and those things just weren't my questions. You know, my questions were more about the human condition. You know, why do we have to die? Why do we have to get old? Why do we have to suffer? Why do we have to be ill? These things really gnawed at me, which were the Buddhist questions in the original story of Siddhartha Gautama, who was living in the pleasure palace, and his parents kept him hidden from those truths. And then he came across them. He left the pleasure palace. He saw an ill person. He saw an elderly person. He saw a corpse. And he was shocked and knew that he had to go on a search. And so that's what Buddhism is. You know, it's a different sort of beast. It's addressing the questions that were my questions. So I naturally felt drawn to it. And then the deeper I went into it, the more I found that sort of corollary questions, sort of an abstract intellectual interest, were there for me. Like, you know, the nature of reality, the nature of the mind, the nature of the self. Do we have a self? You know, what does it mean to be conscious? All of those sorts of philosophical questions that are engaged in a 1,000-year tradition of rigorous logical approach, I found coincided with my own interests. So Buddhism has inflected me as a human being since I was about 17, and therefore permeates my work inevitably in terms of the questions I'm asking in my work and the concerns in my work, the things I care about in my work. Yeah.
I mean, one of the tenets, I don't know if tenets is the right word, but aspects of Buddhism is that, you know, if we have problems, if we suffer, it's because we crave things and desire things. And if we're able to eliminate desire, then we won't suffer. But fiction is about craving and desiring, right? If you don't have that in your book, it's
Right.
it could be dull. I mean, do you think about that at all?
So this precept that's often associated with Buddhism about craving and desire being the root of suffering,
Yeah.
is in some ways misunderstood. I mean, I think we all pull back from that because we don't want to give up on our desires. Of course we don't. it seems very unnatural
Yeah.
to sort of push away what's best, that to be attached in some way, say to the people we dearly love, that's something we should avoid makes absolutely no sense to us. And so a lot of us sort of pull away from this, what we believe this precept means. But it's not quite that.
Okay.
So there's both attachment and aversion. So if you examine your inner life, if you examine your sort of flow of thought and you view it in a particular way, you'll see that almost everything you're doing is moving towards the things you want and moving away from the things you don't want. Attachment and aversion are constant, like, impulses that we are not even mindful of. That now they control us. Like, they happen without us having any say about it. And Buddhism is about being mindful of those things, of your attachments and your aversions, rather than letting go of them, and letting them come and letting them go without attachment. And I really like that as a form of love, because attachment is a form of love. Like if you let's say it's your spouse, and you feel this deep attachment to your spouse. Well, that attachment is an inner state. That's about me. That's about how I feel in here, right? That's a different kind of love from the love that's looking outward to that person and their happiness. It's sort of a focus on how you feel, which is not really the important thing. So for me to like really just honor that person and be like present with that person and love that person, almost in a way means non-attachment, like accepting that we're both impermanent, that we're going to lose each other, which creates this real pathos and endearment in our relationship, knowing that we're impermanent and letting go of that sense of you're an anchor for me, and not recognizing that underneath that there is nothing to anchor to. I mean, there is no anchor. That's a different kind of love. Yeah.
What time is it? I don't have a
6:32.
6:32. Would you? So the book is told from, in the majority of it, from two different voices. It's from Evelyn's perspective, and it's from, is it Searing?
Searing, yeah.
Searing, who is the sixth Rinpoche?
He's the sixth Norbu Rinpoche.
I can't believe I got that right.
In other words, Evelyn's son is ostensibly the reincarnation of this guy Searing, who you meet in full in the book.
Yeah.
So that the idea is that Cliff is not the reincarnation of some sort of abstract, vague notion of a Buddhist Lama, but the abstract of a real person whose life you have seen unfold.
Yeah. In a similar way. I mean, he was chosen the same way Cliff was chosen.
Right.
People just, that to me is wild. I mean, that somehow everybody, they know, I mean, that just creates so many other questions.
It does.
But I don't know, would you read from a little something maybe from his?
I can read some more, but just what you just brought up makes me feel like I should say a few words about reincarnation.
That's really great.
There is this assumption that Buddhism includes this notion of believing in reincarnation, and also believing in karma. And in fact, these are Hindu ideas. Buddhism was born into a Hindu context. It was born in India in a world where Hinduism was pervasive. And so the people who were sort of inventing and creating Buddhism breathed in the air of reincarnation and karma the way that, we breathe in the idea of God. It's just sort of a, sort of a given part of the landscape into which, but they're not Buddhist ideas. They're ideas that Buddhism was sort of born in the context. Anyway, some Buddhists then made something of reincarnation in a mystical way. And so the Tibetan Book of the Dead takes on this idea of the Bardo planes. You pass through these various planes over a 49-day period after your death. And if you don't succeed in, slipping out, then you're reborn after 49 days. And this is strictly a belief. You either believe it or you don't, just like believing in God. And some Buddhists believe it and some don't, but it has nothing to do with being a Buddhist. It's just something that some Buddhists believe and some don't. But going back to this lineage question, the 6th, Norvo Rinpoche, and the 7th, well, each one of these people in the lineage is the embodiment of a very particular set of teachings, very particular knowledge. And from childhood, they're trained rigorously and in a disciplined way to embody this complex school of knowledge and to be the holder of it, the torchbearer of it for their generation. And then they pass away. And another child then becomes the torchbearer, the holder of this thing. That's another way of thinking about reincarnation. That in fact, from generation to generation, there is yet again someone who embodies the same thing. Some more sort of logical, like objective and sort of palatable way to think of it. Mm-hmm. And there are plenty of Buddhists who think of it that way.
But the fact that there's one person
who is the embodiment.
Person, who is the embodiment.
Right. Like the Dalai Lama is the embodiment of a particular set of knowledge. And they feel it is important for it to be embodied in an individual.
Yeah. That
this creates a tone and an ambiance around the set of teachings that brings reverence to it. We sort of pull back from these sort of gestures of reverence that we see in the Buddhist world, all the kowtowing and bowing, prostrating. But they're all designed to preserve the teachings, you know, and to put a hallowed sort of a halo around it.
Yeah.
As far as reading, I could read a piece from Tsering's life. I don't have one right in front of me, but I'll find a good one.
You can actually read whatever you want to read.
Sure, I could read whatever. Sure, I understand. Well, so as a young guy, he begins monastic life as a child, and it's really too hard for him, and he doesn't want to do it, so he runs away. Just like Evelyn does after high school, she wanders around there. He wanders away, and this is the first thing that happens to him. Beyond a pass, he came across 2 herders. Their tent was up, and they were eating dried meat. They had 2 mastiffs and yaks in the hundreds. Tsering asked how far it was to Durgay. 2 days, one answered, a man with few teeth. The day was warm and windless. The man with few teeth poured tea. The other man, who was bow-legged and kept a dagger behind his sash, went into the tent and came out with a mat. Use this, he said, setting it beside Tsering. You're muddy, said the other. That's because I lost my donkey in the river, said Tsering. The donkey had lost its footing at a crossing. Tsering, running, had caught up to it. For a long time he trotted along the bank, encouraging the donkey, coaxing it, but the donkey was unable to change its circumstances, and he wasn't able to swim to where it was. Eventually it went under and disappeared. The mud on his robes was a result of all that. The man with few teeth chewed his gums while Tsering spoke. Then he hawked spit and said, too bad. He raised his chin toward the bow-legged man, who went to the tent, came back with a box of roasted barley meal, set it before Tsering, and said, eat. The bow-legged man sat down on his shins. I want to ask you something, he said. Okay, said Tsering. I was in Durgay, said the man. I never go to Durgay, but I was in Durgay. It turned out that way on account of horses. I was in Durgay, and I was walking around, and I heard a person say, not to me, but to someone else, that the world isn't flat, it's round. That was a while ago, and since then we've wondered about it, because the person who said it was a lama. It's round, said Tsering. The lama was correct. Thank you, said the man. That settles it. It sort of tells you something about, yeah, I mean, it's just a completely different universe from our own, a completely different world that Tsering is wandering in.
We all will find out, I hope, what an adventure this book is. Would love to now, if it's okay with you, open it up to questions, concerns,
right.
Curiosities that you have for David.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and This is mostly a result that I experienced as a reader. I started reading the book over the weekend. I realized very quickly, I didn't know about the Buddhism at first, but that the story was going to grow very slowly. But I was taken by the way that it's written. It seems to be built, and you mentioned that, by small brushstrokes. So almost every sentence, it's alive in ways that is different to many things that we read in fiction. You can take small pieces, and they will read almost like a short story. And maybe it's your reflection of this, maybe it's what you wanted to put, but I felt that in some way it reflects something different about the story, even when we still didn't get to, enjoy the whole story part, but it seems to be written with incredible care for every single sentence. You can see it in what you read.
And I think every writer would say that everything is carefully wrought on the page. Everything is intended. Everything has been poured over, every comma, every period. There is nothing that's not attended to deeply. That's sort of inherent in the act. So I think every writer would say, concur with what you're pointing out. But in the case of this particular book and the way it's constructed, my idea is you see two lives unfolding from childhood, the life of Evelyn and the life of Tsering. And you're meant to recognize resonances between these two lives, ways in which they feel associated, so that by the time the knock comes on the door, you have to believe that indeed it might be true, that Cliff is the reincarnation of Norba Rinpoche 6, otherwise known as Tsering. So that's sort of this intention to let these two lives unfold in a way where these resonances suggest this possibility. And the way that I structure those two lives is not as a profluent, continuous unfolding, which is how sometimes we perceive our own lives. Rather, our lives are not stories. They're just this happened and this happened and this happened. They don't really have the shape of a story. But we can also look back on our lives and think of them as a series of significant or telling moments. I think each of us could say, if we sat down, we could make a list of X number of moments that we feel are significant. And that would be another way of describing our lives to others. And that's how this book is constructed. For each of these characters, there is a series of what I feel are telling moments in which I hope to illuminate their lives and their being more fully with each one, so that their lives unfold for the reader in a way that not only brings about these resonances between the two, but illuminates who they are as a series of significant moments. That's the structure. Yeah. Yes.
Yes, this is, you mentioned being a weird kid and interested in a spiritual life from a young time. And my question for you is, in other books of yours I've read, which I've loved, books like The Other, East of the Mountains, there is a deep fascination and love by you for nature in the Pacific Northwest. Would you say that was a religious experience for you, or has deepened your religious wonder?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I do have a deep sort of feeling about home, about place, and I've always lived in the same place, and I'm not much of a traveler, and my interest in my place goes sort of vertically, like deeper in many ways all of the time. I'm interested in where I live historically. I'm interested in where I live, sort of its natural history. I'm interested in its geology. And so there's sort of an intellectual, sort of interest, but also a deep feeling of relationship to place, which I think is really important. If you feel a love of place, then you feel an obligation and a responsibility to place. And then that makes you truly at home. It's not the beauty of the place and the fragility of the place, the vulnerability of the place to inroads and destruction. It's not an abstraction to you, but a pain. And so you do develop this sort of emotional attachment to home. And I use the word home intentionally. Home has pain attached to it. Home is sacred to us. The invasion of our home is one of the worst invasions we can imagine. Home is our security, And so Yes, all of that is sort of with me as a human being, and therefore it finds its way into my writing in many of my books as something that I feel is really, really significant and important. And I also like to use landscape and weather as significant factors in the story itself. And I like to work with landscape as a part of the story. In Snow Falling on Cedars, it's a snowstorm, which is more than just a practical matter. It's a thematic matter. There's a snowstorm there for reasons of theme. In East of the Mountains, it's set in this big wide open desert under the open sky, again for thematic reasons. Our Lady of the Forest, about apparition of the Virgin Mary, is set in the dense cathedral-like rainforest for a reason. So this is something I always do, is I try to bring landscape into my thematic concerns as a writer in the back.
How did you choose the names Evelyn and Cliff?
Evelyn and Cliff. Mm-hmm. And Evelyn's last name is Bednarz, Bednarz.
That's what I would have picked too.
And at one time point in the book, somebody is stumbling over how to pronounce that last name, and she said, "That's okay. I can't even pronounce it myself." So I've just given her this odd name, this sort of clumsy name, unpronounceable name, because I really believe in the denotative and associative quality of names. Names should not be arbitrary. Names always carry weight and meaning. And so you know this if you've had children and you've been invested with the responsibility to name them, that you think deeply about the name they're going to carry for the rest of their life and how powerful it's going to be.
Yeah.
So the same thing with your characters. You're thinking about what's right for them, what's most reflective of who they are, what seems to really indicate something about them. And the name Evelyn to me felt like very down to earth, very plain, no pretensions, no sophistication, just a very straightforward kind of person. It carried all those associations for me. And so I gave her that name because that's the sort of person she is.
But not Eve. There was no association with Eve.
With Eve from the Bible?
Yeah, that person. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think of that. Yeah.
So,
I didn't.
Or Evelyn Waugh, the male use of that name.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
The female use.
That's right. Like Evelyn Waugh, yeah.
so the name, I'm just curious about the process. So the character was developed before her name? You
Uh-huh.
gave her
That's a
name,
good
and the
question.
same for
They
Cliff?
sort of go hand in hand. I mean, you for in my case anyway, I develop my sense of character while I'm writing, as the story unfolds, under the sort of rubric that character is fate. So what will this person do is a function of who they are, and who they are is a question I carry with me every day into my writing. And every situation that they're in forces me to think more deeply about who they are until X number of pages in, 40 or 50, I'm becoming familiar with them in that way. And at about that point, their name begins to sort of naturally emerge out of that. Yeah. Which reminds me of something with children. Sometimes we give our children a name at birth, and by the time they're 3 or 4, we go, whoops, I gave them the wrong name. You know what I mean? They start telling you what their name is. So sure has that. You asked me about Cliff, too.
Yeah.
Well, at one point in the novel, somebody asks her about the name. Is his name Clifford? And Cliff for short? No, his name's Cliff. Why is his name Cliff? Well, his name is Cliff and his middle name is River because I like nature names, is what Evelyn says. And it's just, she's a sort of a hippie, you know what I mean? And it's just how she is. Yeah. Yeah.
I make a mistake. I do essentially what you were just talking about, the writing, the process of it. But I think, I'll figure out what this character's name really is. But I'm just going to give him a name now. Because he needs to have a name. And it's just going to be a place marker.
Mm-hmm.
So inevitably, the character gets that name.
Uh-huh.
Eventually, because I give it to him on page 4 just because I want to say, Elijah said, right? I don't want to say he said all the time. And it becomes part of the solution of who this character becomes.
It becomes a way into the character.
Yeah.
The name. I can see that. Let me say about this. For me, this is like in conversation event 16 since January 20th. And every one of them has been different. And every one of them has given me an opportunity to hear another writer's voice and get insight into how other writers work. And it's really been great,
That.
Yeah, it has been. Every night is different, and I gain insight from everybody that I'm with, and it's just been, just right now to hear that has me
That's fun.
thinking.
That's
Yeah,
fun.
yeah.
It really is.
Yes.
Speaking of other writers, when you were talking about Buddhism and bringing it into the mainstream or the American response to those, it made me think of a book from a long time, a series of books from a long time ago, Hermann Hesse, and I wonder what your thoughts were if you at any point read his work, because they were quite popular, and
Right.
that was a while back.
Well, and particularly during the sort of countercultural era of the 60s or something, Siddhartha Hesse's work became prominent for that generation. But Hesse harkens back to a time, well, let's put it this way. In the 19th century, in the late 1800s, Westerners began to sort of penetrate into Tibet, a few of them. It was difficult to get there. And even when they got there, they really couldn't understand what they were experiencing. And so they came back, and they their vague sense of Buddhism got synthesized into the Western woo-woo, like Theosophy and Gurdjieff and, Madame Blavatsky and seances and, that whole sort of phenomenon of the late 1800s. And so people associated Buddhism, with that sort of thing. And Hesse wrote just slightly in that context of only having a vague sense of Buddhism. So for me, reading him is to read somebody whose opportunity to grasp Buddhism is limited. This began to change wholesale in the 50s with the Beats, with Kerouac and Ginsberg and Philip Whalen and Gary Snyder. Not Kerouac, but the other three. Okay, we're interested in Buddhism. We're on the west coast of the United States. We're going to go to Japan. We are actually going to become Zen Buddhists. And then we're going to come back actually knowing something. And then with the Tibetan diaspora in the 60s and 70s, Tibetan Buddhism came to the West. And so the flowering of Western Buddhism is a relatively recent experience of the last 75 years, which Hesse missed, So it's sort of Buddhism light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was before the internet, so.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean his novels aren't good.
Yeah.
I mean, they have their legitimate sort of literary, he's a great writer. It's just that in terms of actually presenting some truths about Buddhism, it's quite limited.
A little like the Tao of Pooh.
Huh?
A little like the Tao of Pooh.
Yeah, a little like the Tao of Pooh, right.
Oh, great comparison.
Yes.
Can you talk for a couple minutes about your process? Because you've talked about being 11 years old and encountering this and come to it at 17,
Yeah.
that it's taken you 20 or 30 years to write this book.
More than that.
It makes me wonder how you ever wrote 13 books, much less this one. That everything is so deliberate that you've done.
Well, first of all, when at least for me, when I first started out as a writer at the age of 21, I found it very difficult, and it wasn't really a lot of fun. It was that you're just starting to play the piano and you can't do it, and it's sort of a drag. But then after a year or two of working at the piano, you actually start to produce something beautiful, and now it's fun, and that sort of builds on itself. So I went through this long period at the beginning of, not really enjoying it, but sensing that there was something really fantastic there, a place I wanted to get. And so I made that sort of sacrifice the way that maybe somebody playing the piano does, or anybody who's trying to learn an art or a craft, your sort of apprenticeship. Maybe not that much fun, but you feel driven. And then as you get better at it and you see the fruits of your labor, then it builds on itself. Like now it's fun and you want to do it. And then you can become sort of obsessive about doing it and eager to do it. Like you wake up and you want to do it and it really feels good. And so that generates a prolific work. It's what you've gotten proficient enough at it that you enjoy it so much that it's what you want to be doing. That's kind of the track. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
No?
If that's the case, thank you so much for coming.
Yes.